least we have to show ourselves self-love, right? We have to understand that this is us. We have done some shitty things, and that is not the totality of what we can be in life. We don't.
Hello, family. Welcome back to the Explore the Extraordinary podcast. My name's Betty, and today I'm joined by Joshua. And Joshua is an author, a psychic, a spiritual coach. He also co-hosts a podcast and is an experiencer. And we're really excited to have you contribute to our community at IANDS. I'm going to toss it right over to you.
Awesome. I'm just really excited to be here. So ready to. I've been sharing my story in a lot of different places, and when this came into alignment, I was like, man, I'm excited. I'm gonna jump right on this. So I grew up in rural Wisconsin. I'm a country boy at heart, but as I was growing up, I was really into the church, right? Like that was my first really spiritual experiences, right? Like, my parents would send me to church, and I have to be honest, I didn't ever really want to be there. Like I had questions about a lot of things from a very early age. So, as time progressed, I kind of got away from all that. And this is it's interesting, like growing up, I had a rougher childhood, right? Like I feel like a lot of these mystical experiences seem to happen more people that suffer deeper level traumas in life. The way I see it is that, trauma tends to expand our energetic containers and our perception of the world. I work exclusively with empaths, right? So, and I didn't know that's what I was until very much later, at the age of 33, and I'm 39 now. I didn't know why I felt the way I felt. I didn't know why I could pick up on people's emotions when I walked into a room, and I didn't know why I felt drained so much. So, it was like this from a very early age for me. I remember sitting in second grade, and I just remember looking around at the class, and I was like, I'm not like you people. Like I didn't feel like I fit in, because I was always analyzing everything around me. Like, the way I see a lot of what I experience is I see the way I run my energy is like like a sonar on a submarine, if you think about it like that. Like I'm able to tap into different people at different places, right? And the thing is when I was younger, this is what fried my energy so much, is I didn't know that's what I was doing, because before the ages of 7, we haven't really developed the ability to critically think, right? So we are sponges of our environment, and when our environments are chaotic or unsafe, what happens is that's just the operating system we learn until we decide to take a deep dive into ourselves and figure out how that actually works. So, growing up, I had a rougher run of it. Like I fell into a crowd that was a little bit rougher, because they were the ones that accepted me. So, with that, I really did a lot of things that were very, dangerous. Like I started drinking early on. I started using drugs early on. I was stealing cars early on. Like I was doing all these things because I was trying to feel accepted, right? And because I just always have challenged authority in the natural status quo of things. It's just part of my nature. I was actually talking to somebody before I came on the podcast about that, how a lot of us that disengaged from a lot of the programming of schools are the ones that actually make changes in the world, because we're not bound by any set of rules that were kind of programmed to us programmed into us at an early age. And that played a large role in my life. So I would say, from the ages of 14 to 17, I would say I really disengaged from any spiritual work at around the age of 11, right? Like I didn't do any work on my spirit until I was 33, when I had a spiritual awakening. So, during that time, I spent time in, juvenile detention centers, about 3 years. And I really fell deep into alcoholism and addiction for many years. I would say, from the ages of 17 to 33, I was really, really a mess, because I didn't know who I was. I live in a culture here in Wisconsin where I think we have 20 of the 25 top drinking counties in the country. It's just embedded in the nature. So, and it was a way that I was shoving down my gifts too. Like this was the only way I could dull my senses so as not to feel as deeply as I do. Um, I will share, since we were talking about near death experiences. When I was 18, I was on a Greyhound bus from New York to Idaho, and that bus rolled over. And I remember it vividly. I mean, I remember my head going through, the bus rolled to my side, and my head just went through the window as we're sliding down the interstate doing 65 on black ice. And I remember thinking, this is it, and not being like so scared about it. I just remember like there was an acceptance of this is what is. And I also remember being the absolute last person off that bus because I helped everybody else off that bus before I got off. So it was that was really my first experience with death. As I progressed in my 20s, I was, like I said, still drinking. I was having a lot of experiences though. In the way in which my mind works, I've always had a deep recognition of human behavior and human patterns without even studying psychology. I just understand people because I can feel them. I can see them, and I hear people, right? Like I hear the words behind the words, if that makes sense. I know what people are hiding because I hit it, like by going so far into the depths of my own darkness, I've been able to develop a wisdom that I use to teach and to coach people in my own programs. And I use this also in my psychic abilities. From that well of going so deep, I'm able to draw from it a lot of my life's experiences and a lot of the symbology that spirit shows me and how to help people. And I think a lot of us that go through those near death experiences, the traumatic experiences as children, we have that deeper well to draw from. And I think we go through it for a reason. Like I do believe that there's a purpose in all this. So, throughout my 20s, once again, not doing any work on my spirit whatsoever. I'd worked a 9 to 5 that I just despised. I spent most of my free time either watching TV or in a bar. And I was really of the church of George Carlin. Like I really resonated with so much of what he said. I was like, well, I guess that's my religion. I mean, he said it all. So I didn't really have any faith in anything, right? I was like, I'm here, I'm gonna mess some shit up, and I'm gonna go back to wherever I came from. And I didn't know what it was. In 2017, I had been clean off of drugs. Well, I've been clean off methamphetamine for many years at this point. And I tell this to a lot of the spiritual community, and I don't get a lot of backlash, but they look at me like I'm kind of crazy. But I will say, meth is what brought my spiritual awakening to the forefront on many levels. First, it made me hyper intuitive, right? Like, even though a lot of that, was clouded in deep level paranoia, a lot of gifts started showing up during this time. Not that they were seriously gifts, but I began to hear things, which isn't uncommon, right? It's not uncommon, there's a fine line between psychosis and spiritual gifts, and I can tell you that as a fact that I've learned, since being outside of addiction for many years now. I can see that because I'm able to calm myself and really find that channel to spirit and to what's trying to communicate with me. So I went through this deep level spiritual awakening, and it was interesting, because I'm a firm believer that we come to this life to learn, right? Like I believe that Earth is a school of learning for our souls, and that we have the opportunity to make the lessons easier or harder. It's all about how we're able to surrender to what is being shown to us. I have an extremely hard head. The universe gave me so many outs. They're like, all you have to do is stop doing this one thing. And I'm like, no. So I ended up in prison for 2 years, from 2018 to 2020. And it was in there that I started. And at that time, I was also diagnosed with schizophrenia. And, like I have to say, from that year, I was solidly using very heavily for a year. And I was in a lot of mental health trouble. Like I fully recognize that, like all of the deep level psychosis that lasted that long. It took me a long time to really unwind all that. So during that time, they put me on a litany of medication. They had me on Haldol, risperidone. A lot of different heavy medications during that time. And I felt myself dulling in a lot of ways, right? Like I was losing a piece of myself. I am, I mean, I don't really care for medications that much, if I'm being fully honest. I think that I was overprescribed things, and I think I was misdiagnosed. So, and then that creates this created this almost like victim mentality within me at the same time, right? Like you're schizophrenic, so this is why you feel the way you do. And it's like, no, for me, it was a much deeper issue. It was the fact that I was hypersensitive to my around surroundings my whole life. And also, I was my spirit was sick from never putting any work into it from an early age. So, during this time, I started reading a lot of self-help books, trying to unlock why I operate the way I operate the way I operate. So, I got out, and I'd love to tell you the hero's journey that I got out and everything was great, but I went right back to doing the same shit. It took me 3 days. 3 days. And once again, the universal lessons kept getting harder and harder. And finally, in October of 2020, I was able to start really kicking my habits, right? Because I was, and it was interesting because I was still on all these medications, and I have family that's psychotherapists. I had a team of counselors and psychiatrists, and I said, what happens if I cold turkey all these medications? They're like, well, you could die, and every one of them said that, and I was like, I'm going to do it anyway. And I did. I cold turkeyed all those medications, haven't taken anything since 2020. And I've never felt more clear in my life, right? I've never felt more clear because I'm also sober. So, as I did that, I started stepping into shamanic studies, from across the world. I've worked with medicine men, medicine women from across the world to this point, from England to the native tribes here local in Wisconsin to the Seri tribe down in South America, and and Panamania, and just people I've met on the spiritual path, quantum healers, everybody. And it's so amazing what happens, right? Like when I was able to find the ability to connect with my spirit, this deep level healing started taking place. And it's been a wild ride. I mean, like I wouldn't trade any of it. And I know that sounds crazy, but I wouldn't trade any of what I went through for nothing, because it brought me the wisdom I needed to have to be able to hold space for other people. So and as this, as I started stepping into these deeper level shamanic programs, which I teach now. I teach a program called Welcome to the Woo, with Kelly Sparta. And it's and this is the first program I took. It was a 4-month program on, the way it was explained to me, and the way it worked, and why therapy wasn't working is like we go into these processes, and it's like we try to pull out single threads at a time, right? And they just get stuck. But, like in the way which we did it, we were able to pull everything off at the same time, and it just comes apart so smoother. And during that process, I got to learn how the energetic world works. I got deep into, working with angels. Angels started coming to me in 2020, specifically Metatron and Raphael and Michael, because I was under a lot of demonic attack at this time too. I believe my years of extended drug use had created this open portal for them to attach to, and this is why the psychoses were so prevalent for me, and some people don't experience that in drug use, right? So, but for me, it was always like that. It was because I was, I'm just wired different. So, in being so sensitive, I could pick up on all of it. So, it was, you know, a lot of people talk about their spiritual awakening as this divine understanding of oneness and coming to one with, the creator. And for me, I saw demons, and I saw 10-foot demons in physical form. So, but that opened my eyes that there was absolutely something beyond which I was willing to comprehend at that time. The trouble with that is it shattered every illusion that I had ever created about what life is and what life has always been. So, it was through my shamanic studies that I was able to start unlocking and understanding deeper what's really going on here in the world, and realizing that there is very much an afterlife, and a progression in this, school that we are on in this soul evolutionary process. And as I tapped more into that, I was able to communicate with spirits. My grandma kept coming through after she passed, and then other people's relatives started coming up. I started developing psychic gifts. Like I was able to just really be able to tap into symbology and to see, like to open my third eye up and to see what it is that people needed to hear and how spirit speaks to us. And it's been an amazing process, and learning how energy works and how it works as an empath and how we can protect ourselves from other people's energies and how other people drain our energies and like all the things. But it was from going through all that process that I'm at where I'm at today. And I'm sober, an author, co-host of a podcast, and it's been a trip I don't know what I signed up for before I got here. And I always wonder, but I'm like, it all makes sense now. Like when we can look at our lives as not being victims, but lining us up to something that is helping us grow. The processes get a whole lot easier, right? When we can feel into that surrender with what is, and to just be in the flow of life instead of trying to paddle upstream. And so that's been my process. So
Thanks so much for sharing. Yeah, a lot came up while you were talking, a lot of identification, a lot of resonance. And I think something that I hear a lot that people want to know is, how do they get access to their angels and their guides? You're talking about having this conscious connection to these different angels. Can everybody do that?
absolutely, so the phrase that we end every podcast with is, what you focus on expands what you intend to create. So when you think about that, if and this is why we teach the way we do, because there is so many limiting belief structures that are programmed into us from an early age that this really blocks us, right? And even organized religion, like we tend to look up to these people, like priests and ministers and all this, as the only ones that can connect in this way, and it's so not true. So I would say it's praying, being open to receive signs outside of what you normally would think are signs. Like for me, I see birds a lot. Like I will see messages come through angels through birds. I will see messages come through just in my life. Like I will go on these random adventures. Like because we all, in the beginning, we all have this feeling like it can't be real, especially when we have all these limiting beliefs in place. But when you take yourself outside of your comfort zone and just really listen to that voice inside, right? Because the ego wants to make you think it's not real because it doesn't want to change the operating system it's currently running. But when you can open yourself up to just the adventure of it all and the fact that it might very well be real, you can take away this belief structure and really connect. So for me, I will tell you my process. Early on, I spent a lot of time in meditation and prayer. Like I said, my spirit was very sick. So I was praying for help. And then the angel showed up, which I have to say was crazy for me because I was such a sacrilegious prick for most of my life. Coming from the school of George Carlin, I have to say, when they first started showing up, I was amazed and also a little worried because of all this stuff I had said over in my life. So, but yeah, like prayer, writing, right? Like writing, automatic writing, just write without a thought, right? Just keep writing and see what comes out. You ask a question with your dominant hand and write with the other one. It activates different hemispheres of the brain. There's a lot of different tricks to this. But like just being aware of your surroundings, being present, like in this country, in this time and age, especially during an election year, the collective consciousness is so filled up with disharmony. And in America, we're so on our masculine side, even the women, right? Because we are forced into this do it, do it, do it, do it mode. But to really to connect, we have to be in that receiver mode, and that's the heart piece, right? And that's what the feminine offers. They both masculine and feminine offer that, but it's more prevalent in the feminine. So that would I being open to receive and being in the vibration of gratitude, and that it's already happening. And that's, I know that's it sounds easy, and it's as easy as you can make it. If you overthink it, you complicate it. If you just know, it comes easier.
Thank you for that. What would you say to somebody who is struggling with addiction right now?
You're not alone. So many of us get backed into a corner and we think that we are the only ones going through this. And the hardest part for me, and what kept my cycle in repeat, was the shame and the guilt that I felt about it, right? Like that shame and that guilt kept repeating itself. And I would say don't focus, like if you're serious about getting past your addiction, don't focus on the addiction. Focus on where the core wound comes from. Right. I don't talk about addiction much because it was never addiction for the reason I was an addict. That was the problem. It was the stuff I needed to work through from my childhood, my ability to receive love, how I was perceived, and how I wasn't nurtured. I nurtured myself through substances. And I think a lot of people that I have worked with, that's been similar. A lot of us come from childhood homes that were chaotic. So we feed into that, right? We become products of chaos. So, we have to we have to show ourselves self-love, right? We have to understand that this is us. We have done some shitty things and that is not the totality of what we can be in life. We don't have to buy into that program, and the mind wants to fight it. The demon of addiction wants to fight it, but it doesn't have to be that way. You just have to find a way to release that shame and guilt to, center. And then the truth is your purpose comes from your pain. That is the true way of alchemy, in the way I see it. The alchemists of old always talked about turning lead into gold. And I look at as turning pain into purpose is part of it, but it's deeper than that as well. It's turning the spirit into gold. And when we can go through that level of darkness and pull ourselves out of it, you have access to power. You have no idea.
Thank you for sharing that. I don't know why this is coming up while you're talking because we didn't discuss this, but I'm just curious if you could share a little bit about. So let's say somebody's really bogged down. They're bogged down in the trauma, they're bogged down in some manifestation of addiction, some demons attached to them, like the things that we're talking about, right? Which is incredible that people are able to overcome. You've overcome, I've overcome. Hope is absolutely out there and it's available to all of us, and you have a lot of spiritual knowledge. And so I'm wondering, what is your perception on what happens if somebody does succumb to those things and maybe they end their lives?
Well, that's an interesting question. Can you explain that a little bit more about what you mean by that? So if they succumb to the addiction and they end their lives, what happens next?
Yeah, kind of like what's your spiritual insight on what happens after a person commits suicide?
I got to say that's an interesting one. I say one of two things can happen, right? Um, so first, that spirit can stick around for a while. That spirit can, if it leaves this world before it was really fulfilling its contractual obligation, that it can stick around and not know that it's here. And like continue kind of living this life, and just it's really like a purgatory, you know. But I've also seen ones that cross over, right? So there's also contracts where that is part of it to help other people grow, right? Like when I kind of look at look like this, you know, we have like this soul family, right? And we all play a part down here in helping our souls evolve. So sometimes people come into our lives, and I imagine you've been through this too. You're like, these people come into our lives to hurt us in some ways, right? Because through that pain we can grow, and it's kind of predestined to a degree, and not that we don't have free choice, but I'm not saying that doing that is okay by any means, but there does seem to be a link to that. But one of the things that I've helped do is help cross these spirits over too. Like I ran into a few of these that needed help crossing over, after succumbing to addiction. um yeah, so that's kind of my take on that.
Thanks for sharing that. I don't know why Spirit was like, ask about this, but I really loved your response, right? And because it's not one size fits all. That's what I heard you say, right? Like
Yeah.
we can have different ideas, and again, what you focus on is what happens. And so, focus on things that light you up. Focus on things that bring you hope, that you feel are purpose led. I really like that. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about maybe some of your psychic experiences. Do you have like a cool experience that you can share with our audience?
I've got so many. It's hard to start there, So, the first experiences were the witnessing of demons, right? Like seeing them all around me. And seeing them around other people that I was around, being in that drug culture, what happens is we become those portals, right? So, being able to see them, like it's interesting, like when you think about like the Native American concept of a vision quest, right? Where you go like 3 to 5 days without eating or drinking water, and then the visions start. And the same thing happens with stimulants, right? I mean, it's not what you really want to experience because it's also stimulating parts of the brain that cause psychosis, but it's a very real process, right? Like when you can go that deep in, you start seeing a lot of different things. So that was my first experience. Since then it's like my grandmother's voice coming to me from heaven, right? Like she passed away while I was in prison, and I was so sad about it all because we were so close. I mean, she actually stayed back as one of my spirit guides, and she's been so prevalent on my journey. And this is what's funny: the day I got out of prison, I actually wrote a song for her, and that song ended up being very prophetic. Like that song, I didn't have the spiritual knowledge I do now, and there's stuff in there about the dark nights of the soul, and her being a guide. And, like it's so funny to look back at that and just see how beautiful it is because we are all living through spirit in one way or another. Right. And that's why if you walk by somebody and they said something that you've been thinking about, and you're like, what is that? Right. Like, I've been thinking about that. Like, this is how spirit works. Spirit works through all of us in different ways. Um, Other spiritual experiences, I spent time with medicine men down in Texas, and I took a bufo ceremony, which is the frog in Cambo, and during that process, I've been able to, I was able to. It's like death. It's like experiencing death before death and becoming comfortable with death. So it helps to release the fear of death. So that's another one. I recently, just a few weeks ago, went through a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. I had been struggling with opening my heart on a deeper level, right? The path of, the shamanic path I've been on, it's important to have this huge open heart, right? And because of my life, I've always, I've lived through the heart, but my head and my heart were seldom in alignment. And I asked spirit, I was like, listen, I got like 5 days to put this piece of healing together before I'm going to really struggle with this next phase of my life. The next morning, boom, like I shot up out of bed and I was dry heaving, and like it was like all of this darkness was coming out of me, all of this inner inner poison of inner judgment, outer judgment, just coming and bubbling up. And my root chakra to my crown chakra was buzzing, was on fire. And I lost 3 hours. I was in prayer. I was praying with Jesus. I was, praying with, Nix, with one of the deities I work with, which is funny because it was about dark and light. And also, myself, I came outside of my body to also help in that healing process. It was like I was able to move past that. Other than that, it's wild. Like I go on psychic adventures all the time, and what I mean by that is I will leave the house with no particular place to go, like the old song. I will just drive and I will listen. I will flip coins at roads. I will shake dice, and it leads me to the most magical places. I'll follow birds, right? And it's all showing me the deeper level of that there is something so much more going on here. And coming from that background of being an atheist for 20 years of my life, I love seeing how magical this world is, and it's available to all of us. We just have to get outside of our box. We are so programmed into our box, our routine, our life. I urge you, anybody who's listening, shake your life up a bit and go see the magic. Get out of your routine. The world will adjust.
That's a really good message. It's funny, as you were talking about your grandmother as your spirit guide, my grandmother is also one of my spirit guides. And you said she stayed behind to help me. And I was like, oh, that's really beautiful. And my grandmother comes to me in the special number 931, and it was 9:31 when you said that. And I looked at the clock on my computer and I was like, oh my God, okay. It's all happening. It's all real. And I think that's really beautiful, everything that you said. I think that it's also wonderful that you've incorporated different kinds of spiritual practices, so it doesn't have to be like you die and that's the only way that you can have a spiritual experience. You're talking about prayer, about meditation, about using plant medicine to help you, going into sacred ceremonies. And all of those things are totally valid because we all have these mirrored experiences. Even though we're all our own individual people, how are we all having the same experience? There must be some truth behind that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's such a stigma around plant medicine. And it's finally coming around. Like the research they've done, especially with veterans with ketamine and psilocybin, has been phenomenal. Like people are really healing from trauma. Like I myself microdosed for a long time. And I will do a macro dose once in a while. I actually did after the Kundalini experience. Like I was really having trouble moving that energy. And I was, honestly, I was three-quarters of the way out of my body after it. So I needed some help coming back. And it's a beautiful medicine. I also caution people to really do your research when working with people, because there are a lot of people out there that are just in it for the money. Find a reputable source. This isn't like a vacation spot. This is deep level healing that we're intending to do in these ceremonies. So it's important to find reputable providers of this type of medicine and really do your research, because it's about really connecting with your spirit and letting go of a lot of things that don't serve you. And you really want experienced facilitators when you embark on a journey like that, because there is a lot more going on than you than you think. So having somebody that can really walk that path with you is super important.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's something very important to keep in mind for sure. So another thing that came up for me while you were talking was I heard you mention Metatron, and that this is one of the angels that communicates with you. And I'm wondering if you can tell our audience who Metatron is and what was his message for you or for the collective.
So Metatron, yeah. So he showed up for me in 2020. He was one of the first three, like I had stated before. And he didn't show up as Metatron. He showed up in Metatron's cube, and Metatron's cube being a sacred geometrical figure that holds all the platonic solids, all of creation being built out of these solids, right? So to me, in the way I view Metatron, and he was Enoch. Like there was a lot of books that were taken out of the Bible, right? And these books are the books you should be reading: the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Thomas, Enoch. These are the books that were taken out for very specific reasons, because they're a guide to actual spiritual awakening, and they don't want you to awaken. So I'm telling you, read the books. So like Enoch was a human who transformed into an angel. Like that's what the story of Enoch is. And so Enoch to me is the scribe of God, right? Like he writes the Akashic records. That is how I view him. And so the message from Metatron for the collective is tune into yourself, right? It's always tune into yourself. The knowledge that you seek is always within you, right? We always look for, we are so trapped, especially here in America, with this and with technology in this age of instant gratification, that we're coming farther and farther away from our spirits. Like the angels are here to help, right? And we just have to be in resonance with what they have to offer. And yeah, Metatron is also a protector, and this is why I believe he came to me, because him and Michael came at the same time, and there's such a level of protection that comes with working with Metatron's cube. It's a very powerful symbol, and I mean, and this dates back. Like if you go into sacred geometry, right? The flower of life was found carved all over the world in different places at different times, and in a time where these communities were not connected. So there's some deep level stuff going on here. You just have to break free of what you've been taught, and I know that's hard because we have an ego attachment to what I believe has always been, that's the truth, because that's what I've always been taught. I look at myself as a character in the Bible myself, so I don't need to necessarily go back there to understand. I look at myself as the main character in my life, and that's what Metatron wants you to look at too. Are you being a main character, or are you just being a supporting cast and mulling around?
I love that. I really enjoyed this conversation today. Thank you so much for your willingness to serve our community. I just want to see if there's anything else that you feel called to share before we close out our conversation.
Yeah, so one of the things I always like to end with is we have this tendency to give and give and give. Even those of us in addiction, we get a piece of our self-worth from being givers and being martyrs. And the truth is, if you want to really take a deeper journey and a healing path, you have to open yourself up to receiving as well. So what I always like to say is show yourself the same love that you show everybody around yourself. The way that you view people, and you love people, and you do so without judgment, turn that inwards, because it's usually our own internal monologue that is not in alignment with how we feel in our heart. So just know that you are loved. You've always been worthy of love, and you will always be loved just for being you. It doesn't matter what you've done. We're all imperfectly perfect down here. Nobody is perfection, and stop trying to live up to a standard that isn't authentic to your soul.
Well said. Definitely a great message to leave on. And again, thank you so much. And you can contact Joshua. All of his information will be in the liner notes of this episode. And we'll see you next time.